Hi, we're back for chapter 18 of Surviving Bear Island. And if you remember from chapter 17, Tom has spent several days now at fish camp, and he's, thinking about what he needs to do here next. And he's also trying to catch some fish. So here we go, chapter 18. I had the dead fish by the tail and was about to slit the belly when I saw the alders waving. I dropped the fish next to the other four I'd gaffed and stood up. "Dad," I yelled. "Dad!" Just across the creek, a black bear emerged from the forest. I thought about tossing a fish across the creek as a peace offering, but I needed these fish, all of them. The bear stood on its hind legs, wagged its head back and forth. My knife, with its 4-inch blade, felt tiny in my hand. My body was shaking. This bear was twice as big as the one I'd chased out of my camp. "Don't run, don't run, don't run," I told myself. I bent, picked up my gaff, and held it over my head. The bear took another few steps toward me. I wished I were in camp, in my territory. "Hey bear, hey bear, hey bear!" The bear dropped from its hind legs and came forward again, like I was calling it over. I sucked in a breath. Maybe I should just shut up, or pick up a rock and throw it. I wish there were a fire between me and that bear, instead of water. Now it stood at the edge of the channel, like 30 feet away, the tan spots standing out on either side of its snout. And its head was tilted, the way Billy's dog would tilt hers when I whistled. I still had the gaff raised. If it came after me, I'd do what I could. Take a swing at it, try to drive it away, use my knife if it was on top of me. Then the bear lay down, kicked all 4 legs up, and moved side to side, scratching its back on the rocks. Then it rolled to one side, rose on 4 legs, and disappeared upstream without looking back. Luck, just luck. I knew I couldn't be lucky forever. I worked all day and all night and all the next day drying my fish. I hauled rocks from the beach and built a pad so I could take fish off the fire without rolling them in the dirt. I found 2 small sturdy spruce trees growing close together and used these to break alder for my supply of grill wood by positioning long pieces between the trees and pulling until the alder broke. I'd let the fish cook on the grill until the tail turned crispy. With sticks, I'd roll the fish on the rock pad and replace any of the alder that had burnt up. After each fish cooled enough so I could touch it, I cut the head off. Then I'd peel the top half of the fish from the bones and set it aside and remove the backbone and ribs attached to the bottom half. If the fish was cooked, then the bones slid right out. Then I put both halves back on the alder grill and let them cook until they were crispy. I gnawed on the fish heads, eating the skin and the little bits of meat. And for the first time, I ate the eyes of the fish, knowing I'd need every ounce of energy I could find. I thought Dad would be proud of how I'd taken his method for cooking salmon and made it work for drying fish. I dried 5 fish, but was dead tired. Dad's rule about no food in the tent made sense when you could hang your food up high on a rope and you had a kayak to travel in. But this food, it was my life. Even if it did attract bears, I just had to have it with me while I slept. That night in my bedroom, I did what I usually did. I pulled my boots off and tipped them sideways in front of LF, peeled my damp socks from my feet and spread them out on some boughs close to RF. The worst thing about taking my feet out of my boots was the smell. My feet reeked like boiled cabbage, and since I hadn't been out of my boots for 2 days because of the round-the-clock fish drying, they stunk worse than usual. But I had bigger problems than that. I pulled out my survival kit. The 2 meal pack bars stared at me, and I felt a lump in my throat. I set them aside and focused on the real problems. One of the lighters had stopped working. I counted 15 matches. I pulled out the flint. My dad had shown me how to use it. I didn't know if it was true flint, but that's what he called it. It was silver black, about an inch long cylinder, thin as a pencil, attached to a tiny plastic handle. In the winter, in the wall tent sometimes, I'd play with it. It was pretty easy to get a spark, but to turn that spark into fire, that was the trick. I opened my knife and ran the blade across the flint, causing a large spark to form, fall, and disappear. The sparks got to hit some very small, dry, flammable material like dried grass or wood shavings or tiny scraps of birch bark, and then you've got to blow on it and feed it. I wish Dad would have put another lighter in each kit and more matches. That's what he should have done. My chest tightened. If the lighter stopped working and I ran out of matches, the flint would be my only hope. And what if I couldn't do it? What if I could do everything else but this one lousy thing I failed at? Then what? I needed more matches and lighters, not stupid flint or idiot meal pack bars. Fire, fire, fire. Didn't Dad know how important that would be? I still hope someone would just show up before I even set off to the Sentinels. But if no one came, I'd have to build my fire from scratch every night. I ran the blade across the flint again and watched another spark disappear into the boughs. Could you really start a fire with a spark in a wet place like this? I doubted it. I hoped the lighter would last. But if I hadn't found his vest, I'd have less, a lot less. I might not even be alive if I hadn't found his vest with the survival pack inside. And he'd taught me so much, and wherever he was, because of his voice, I was still learning from him. Gaffing the 5 fish today had taken every ounce of my concentration and experience. The run had thinned out, and I'd noticed more and more carcasses of spawned out salmon the last few days, some floating on top of the water, others bouncing along the stream bottom, driven by the current. I didn't want to end up like those fish, and I thought, if I died out here, it'd be worse. Those salmon had already lived most of their lives. Dying after spawning was what was supposed to happen. Their bodies were programmed to croak. If I died, I'd be missing out on the rest of my life, just like my mom. But if I died, I wouldn't be around to miss anything. And when I thought of death this way, it didn't seem as scary. What scared me more was what it would feel like to be dying if I starved to death or froze to death or was attacked by a bear, or if I was so weak that the gulls pecked my eyes out while I was alive. Nothing would change on Bear Island if I died. The fish would still spawn. The bears would still catch them. The eagles and gulls and porcupines would still scavenge. The trees would still grow. The tide would rise and fall. I wouldn't be missed. I was a small part of a big place. But at least at this place, this one creek, I felt like I belonged. The next day, I converted my dad's raincoat into a fanny pack to carry the fish. I tied the fish together with a piece of rope and then rolled them up in my dad's raincoat and used 2 pieces of rope to secure the coat around the fish. I tied the coat around my waist with the arms. I threaded the 2 life vests through the fish fanny pack jacket so they hung behind me. Before I left, I walked over to my kitchen shelter and took one last look. I'd left nothing except the word Sentinels made from rocks I'd hauled up the beach in case my dad was still working his way south and was behind me. The sun broke free from behind the clouds and blasted my eyes as I crossed the creek and worked my way along the rocky shore. The tide was out. I heard blows, put my hand to my forehead to make a visor, scanned the water, and counted 6 killer whales, a family, milling in the bay, their white cheek patches just visible above the waterline, black curved fins rising from rounded backs. 2 of them were much smaller, like half the size of the bigger ones. Killer whales stay together for life, my dad had told me. You're born into a family and you stay in that family. You are never alone. With the smaller whales in the middle of the pack, I watched them swim along the opposite shore and then disappear around a point. A family, I whispered, a real family. I kept walking and started to sweat, so I took my raincoat off and tied it around my waist. Little fish darted in and out of the protection of rocks and seaweed as I splashed through the intertidal zone. Islands of black mussels, clinging to rocky, muddy sludge, dotted the ground. Eating shellfish on a trip is risky business. They can have bacteria that can kill you, especially if there's a red tide. Don't know much about when it's okay to eat them. Wish I did, because they sure are good. Oh, Dad, how do you know all this stuff? The exact stuff I need to know. How? When I'd first washed ashore and heard his voice about the survival kit, it startled me. But now, the voice was more like a friend. Like it didn't matter if it was coming from somewhere, outside me or from within me. What mattered was I could hear it. Maybe it was him, my family, pulling me to the sentinels, because he was there. I turned away and saw my shadow stretching toward fish camp. I could see where my stream entered the bay, where my home had been. A tiny lump formed in the back of my throat, and I swallowed it down. Part of me wanted to go back and just stay. It would be easier than what I was doing now, but I knew that choosing the easy path meant choosing death, and I wanted to live. Well, that's the end of chapter 18. We'll take off with chapter 19 tomorrow.